Hey, what's good, people? Mr. Zensphere back. Today we're going to be looking at the mixer section in RENOISE, continuing on with our beginners tutorial series. The mixer section is available by clicking this tab here, or if you have the mixer saved in one of your preset views, you can use that preset view. And you can see that these are slightly different, the way they bring them up, but that just depends on the preset view, if that makes sense. So we can see, at least the way I have it set up, we've got the mixer section, we've got the spectrogram, and we've got the track DSP section down here. Again, this is all kind of customizable, but this is more or less the kind of the default mixer view. You may have scopes instead of the spectrogram, and you can change that up here depending on how you want it. I think you can also close that panel. And I think there might be a way to detach the mixer view as well. No, that's the instrument list. In any case, there's lots of different view options. But we'll be focusing in on this mixer section itself here. You can see we have our track architecture kind of laid out, continuing on with this same beat that we've been working on for whatever it is. Right, you remember it. It's terrible, but it's music, sort of. It counts. So we can see we have a group here, and this group contains these three tracks. Then we have a couple empty tracks here, track 9 and 10, as well as our percussion section, kick, clap, closed hat, open hat, and then we have our master track here. And this track to the right of the master track, and any tracks that appear to the right of the master track are going to be send tracks. And we'll talk about how you use send tracks today. Down below, you can see we have some mixer strip functions. We've got a mute button. We've got a solo button, which mutes everything else. We have the track panning. And, you know, this has a little indicator showing where it is. You can click on the value field and enter a number if you want. You can double click to recenter. We've got our decibel slider with the decibel represented numerically below. And again, you can double click, and then we have our track meters, which kind of show our level as well as our peak by the red, and then level in green. And that, of course, will depend on your theme, but we can talk about that later. Then we also have track delays. So if you need to shift the timing of tracks in time, you can do that here. And this allows for 3 decimal points of precision in terms of shift. That can be handy for, correcting timing if you have like a sample that starts late and you don't, trim it in the sample editor. Or if you want your hi-hats to kind of like push the beat a little bit, you can bring them backwards in time, which doesn't actually bring things backwards in time. It just shifts everything else forward. Sometimes that's a nice effect. In any case, you can play with track timings using this offset here. Down below, we have the track routing. And this just kind of tells RENOISE where to send this audio, right? So you can see these are all going directly to the master track. These are going to the group 8 track, which is then going to the master track. These are going to the master track. This is going to my audio output, which is internally routing to OBS, so you can hear what's coming through RENOISE. And then the send tracks also go to the master track by default. By default, pretty much everything just flows to the master track, but you do have some say in terms of how you want to route things. If you want to do like direct external routing for particular tracks, for external audio processing, things like this. Okay, let's look at this section here. Whatever track you're on is going to have this little mixer device. And some of these correspond and some of these do not correspond to these controls here. So if we have active off or mute, off, I think it mutes it, but it also, maybe it doesn't trigger the MIDI, whereas mute just doesn't bring the audio through. I'm not totally clear on the distinction there. I generally don't use these controls. I'll just mute things on the mixer strip itself. A couple of handy key commands to know are command backslash, or maybe it's command, I guess it's backslash. It's the one that's not with the question mark. Command backslash will solo a track, and you can toggle solo on and off with command backslash, which is super useful if you want to just solo part of the arrangement that you're working on. And shift backslash will mute and unmute. So that's super useful. In RENOISE, if a track is soloed and say another track is soloed and you unsolo one of the tracks, you have to unsolo both of the tracks to hear the entire arrangement. So just kind of like be mindful of how you're using solos and mutes. Sometimes it may behave differently than you're expecting. When you solo something in a group, you see that the group track is also soloed. And that's just so the audio can flow. But say you unsolo, okay, I think that worked the way you would expect it to. So it should, sometimes you can get in tricky situations where you have to manually unsolo things so that you can hear what you're expecting to hear. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, I'm drinking coffee. This has our routing. This is track color. We can change the track color here. We can change the track name here. We have our timing offset, which is the same. And then we have our panning, but our panning is not reflected in the panning of the mixer strip. So I'm not exactly sure how these behave. Let's take a listen and see. Okay, so we've got our kick here. And if we change the panning here, we're all the way left. And then, interesting. So if we change this to all the way right, we get nothing. Whereas if this is center, can't tell if there's more volume. It almost seems like there's more volume between center and left. So it seems like this panner takes precedence, and this probably corresponds to the track effects, panning effects command, or pattern command, which we'll talk about pattern effects in a separate video. That's some really fun stuff. We'll get into that. So this volume is also independent of this volume, and this volume kind of takes precedence, right? This sort of like functions within this, right? So you can't turn it up beyond the maximum, if that makes sense. I feel like a dash glitch. Kind of, sort of, if that makes sense. Love you, Dash. All right, and then we have this track width parameter, which you can see in our phase diagram, sends mono information to the sides. And I forget exactly how it does this, but there's some internal phase shifting. It's similar to the stereo expander DSP. So if you want to bring things out into the sides of your mix as opposed to the mid of your mix, we have this kind of handy width slider here. So this panning, I believe, corresponds to our track panning. Let's just take a look and see if we add some panning, which is the panning is our middle. So we'll just add some different values here. I'm going to enable record and change my step length to 4, and I'm just going to spam some different numbers. And let's go back to our mixer section, and then we'll just watch this and see if it changes. Okay, so it doesn't affect this. It does affect the panning. So that's interesting. This may just be for automation. So it looks like we have multiple ways of impacting panning. This I don't believe you can automate, but this you can automate. If I right click here, it then enables this automation icon. If I click on that, then it brings us to our automation lane for mixer panning. So I think this is just, in RENOISE, it's common that there are multiple ways to do things. So we can impact panning here if you want to just set the track panning. You can automate panning here if you want to use automation, or you can use effect commands to kind of manually program your panning on the level of the pattern editor. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. We have lots of ways of doing things, and this is sort of a common theme in RENOISE. Now this volume slider, I believe if we use the L command, that should actually show up in the mixer device in our DSP lane. So let's see, if I hit this, you can see that there's a little square here that shows that there is pattern command automation, and it hits that L0 and it takes this to 0, and we have visual feedback on that. So that's different than the panning command. I wonder, anyway, I don't want to get too far into the weeds about pattern effect commands at this point, because it's not really what we're intending to focus on. But this L command can be quite useful for setting volumes from the pattern editor. And I believe there's also a pattern effect command for the surround width. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Maybe it's WXX, I'm not sure. So anyway, this is our kind of mixer device in our track DSP lane. So we have the capacity to add whatever DSP we want within the track, right? So we can add, say, a distortion. We'll just grab a distortion by double-clicking on it from this list over here. You can see these ones with stars. These are my favorites. We can collapse the favorites, and then we get into native effects and meta devices, doofers, and then we get into VSTs and things like this. If you're anything like most people, you have a metric fuck ton of DSP plugins. So this search field is your friend here. There's somebody who's working on a visual VST browser for RENOISE. So if you're interested in that, go to the forum and look for that thread and indicate your support. He's asking for help, but it might be nice addition to the software to have a visual VST browser as well. But anyway, I digress, as per usual. So now we've got this distortion device in our DSP lane. And if we turn up the gain, sounds like a distorted kick, right? Whatever. You can change all these parameters and such. We'll just take that off. But this is useful because we can have, you know, kind of like a mixer strip, you know, signal processing. If you want, you know, like certain utilities, you can just have them on every track. Like for instance, in my template, I have a variety of different DSP that I use kind of on a regular basis. Like I've got a gainer to adjust the pre-gain, and I've got an EQ, and I've got a shelving unit to roll off lows and highs, and I've got, you know, a compressor and maximizer, things like this. You know, these kind of like common mixing utilities are useful to keep in your track DSP lanes when you're setting up your template. Once you kind of like decide how you like to work and how you want to use RENOISE, it's highly customizable in that way. And people definitely work in very different ways in RENOISE. So you finding the way that works well for you is part of the fun. So you definitely have that potential. And you can also, let's say I want to copy this DSP lane over to something else. I can right click here, go to device chain and do copy, or I can do Shift Option C. And we'll do that. We'll do Shift Option C. And then I can right click, go to device chain and paste Shift Option V. And I can do the same thing here, Shift Option V, Shift Option V. Right, if I want this same DSP chain in every single track. Now we haven't really talked about using VST instruments in RENOISE yet. And I suppose now might be as good a time as any to talk about how you use VST instruments. You would just navigate to an instrument slot and then go to your plugin tab. And then you select your plugin from this list over here. Let's just pull up Serum. And now I've got Serum. Oops. Oh, sorry, I have multiple instances of RENOISE open, so my MIDI's not functioning the way it normally would. And then let's say we want this plugin to live on track 9. Then we could add whatever processing after the internal effects chain here on this track, so we can have track effects. And then if you say you want to send it to something else, you can use a send device to send it to over here. So RENOISE has really super flexible internal effects architecture for RENOISE instruments that you can use, elaborate parallel processing and do all kinds of fancy fun tricks. And I've got a lot of my videos are oriented around that type of thing. But with VST instruments, all that you get essentially is track effects. There's no dedicated like parallel effects playground for the VSTs specifically. So you have to do all your effects processing on the track and then using sends. So if you're doing, if you're trying to do kind of like more complex parallel processing with VST instruments, sometimes it makes sense to do your sound design, get the sound where you want it, and then resample it and work with it as a RENOISE native sampled instrument, because then you have access to the effects section, which can be as complex as you want with as many effects chains as you want, maybe up to 256 or something like that. Let's bring back that last one. And that's a lot of power under the hood of RENOISE, and part of what makes RENOISE so fun, in my opinion. But all that to say, when you're using VSTs, it's a bit more limited. There's still plenty that you can do, especially if you're dropping in doofers, but it's trickier to do parallel effects processing using VST instruments in RENOISE, because we don't have a parallel container like the Ableton rack, effects rack, how you can split the signal chain and have parallel processing. We need that. So RENOISE devs, please consider making a parallel container for all of us RENOISE users. It would open things up hugely. Okay, so let's see, what else is there to say about the mixer? Obviously, you set your levels. Let's do some of that. See if we can sculpt this to sound a little bit better. I think I want to maybe bring in a compressor on this clap. So we'll go and we'll find our compressor. Oh, I have I have this bit shift gain and digital filter on everything now, but that's all right. It doesn't really matter. And let's just dial up the compressor. Yeah, good enough. AB by hitting Option and click. Shut it off and turn it on. And I think you can also do that hitting Return. Yeah. So that's useful to know. When you're in the track, you can navigate using the arrow keys to different DSP devices, and you can turn things on and off using Return. And you can use the arrow keys to go left and right as well. Okay. So that's the basics of the mixer. I said we were going to talk about send tracks, so let's talk about send tracks. Say we want to take our bass and melody, just for the sake of example, and throw a reverb on it all together. We could do that here in the group track, but we could also set up a reverb in a send track, or delay or something, anything, it doesn't really matter, and then send to it. So we need to find our send device and pull the send. We can drag and drop it or have the track selected and double click it. And then we have some options in the send device. So we can mute the source or keep the source. We can apply post mixer volume and pan, or we can do pre-mixer volume and pan if we uncheck this. If you're not sure what that means, look into signal flow it'll make sense. And then we can dial this in to the level that we want. So let's say we want to keep the source and send some of this to the reverb. And actually, let's group our clap and hats, and let's do this on our percussion section. And we'll get a little room reverb going here. So let's make our room small, make it not that wide. Let's dampen it, and we'll take the dry mix all the way down. That's dry. And that's with a little room reverb on there. So that's just an example of how you would use a send track. Again, you can kind of make these effects chains as complex as you want. So this could be like distortion going into delay, going into reverb, going into a flanger, whatever you want. And then you can, send as many tracks as you want to that send track and have them be affected by the send track. I actually don't end up using send tracks very much in my own music. Sometimes I'll use them for like a little more complex routing, mid-side processing, things like that. Because I end up doing a lot of my effects processing in the instruments themselves, and we'll talk about that in another video. But yeah, that's, let's see, that's basically the mixer. We have different signal flows. We can do pre or post mixer volume. And then we also have some options for what we want visible, right? So we can have mute and solo, we can have pan visible, we can have the volume slider visible, or we can just have it as a horizontal slider. We can, take away basically all the options if we want. There's routing, there's delays, so on and so forth. So you have some options here in terms of what you want displayed, right? So I think that basically covers it. Again, tooltips are your friends. This is how to use the mixer section. It's pretty straightforward. We'll get into automation in the next video. I don't want these to get too long. But yeah, if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. Yeah, make lots of music. Keep being awesome. Peace.